this last session of the workshop. My name is Ryan Ali, and I am a professor in computing at Hamad bin Khalifa University in Qatar, in Doha, in Qatar. And this panel is going to be about the ethical dilemma in software design that is likely to affect people behavior. So we are used to software that we use, but actually recently we are seeing a family of software that uses us in a way that manipulate our decision, or let's say not manipulate in the negative sense, but sometimes in the positive sense, like makes things easy for us, nudge us, try to change our behavior, and so on. So we thought about the engineering aspect of that and whether we can ever decide about the ethical nature of that software, the behavioral change software, a software that can change behavior and affect people's behavior and attitude and motivation, whether in the positive sense or in the negative sense. So with us in this panel, we have Professor Bernstein from De Montfort University in Leicester, and we have Professor Gopal Ramshore from University of Southampton. Nice to see you, Gopal, for the first time. And we have also Dr. Dina Al-Thani, who will be joining us, assistant professor in Hamad bin Khalifa University here in Qatar. So let me start first by introducing the first speaker of this panel, Professor Gopal. Professor Gopal is a professor of artificial intelligence in the agents, interaction, and complexity groups at University of Southampton. He is also the director of the UK Research and Innovation Trustworthy Autonomous System Hub, the focal point of a relatively large fund, £33 million, the Trustworthy Autonomous Systems Program. Gopal is a Turing Fellow associated with the Alan Turing Institute, a fellow of the Institution of Engineering and Technology, member of the EPSRC Peer Review College, and member of the Mauritian AI Council. Gopal is interested in the development of trustworthy autonomous agents and multi-agent systems and their application to cyber-physical systems such as smart energy systems, the Internet of Things, or disaster response. His research combines a number of techniques from machine learning, AI, game theory, and HCI, which is the last one actually made me assured a bit because my question is going more or less to be relevant to HCI. So my first question to you, Gopal, is that, again, that we are used to software that we use, a software that can take decision on our behalf, but really sometimes the software can affect our attitude, our decisions, and so on. So in terms of like interactive agents, social robots, that sort of thing, especially with the Internet of Things now, they like accessing our biological signals sometimes to conclude our mood, if you see our emotions, and try to tell us, oh, you need a break from the screen, for example. That kind of software is becoming really popular. So I would like to know your view of the ethical nature of designing that software.
Sure, thanks. I hope you can hear me clearly. And good to meet you all, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. These are really important questions that we are trying to address as part of the work we're doing in the Trustworthy Autonomous Systems Hub. We have 18 projects currently going on since we started in September 2020. And these projects address issues that touch on the design process of these autonomous systems, these intelligent bits of software. They look at the operation of these systems and the regulation and governance of these systems. So we are really interested in all these aspects and the issue of systems that can monitor your physiological signals, your behavior in different contexts, and it's very context specific. So if you look at the sectors that we consider, for example, we're looking at a number of sectors, including healthcare, defense, and security, IoT, Industry 4.0, etc. In these different contexts, you have different uses for these sorts of systems. So you in the healthcare sector, it's a given that you would plug a sensor onto someone and monitor their heart rate, their blood sugar levels. In an autonomous vehicle, in a vehicle, you would normally never monitor a driver, but now very soon with the new types of autonomous vehicles, you'll have to monitor the driver's behavior. And then and in other sectors, in defense and security, in cybersecurity, you have to monitor behaviors of machines that mediate the behavior of their users. So we're starting to see a lot of these behaviors that, being monitored in places that they were not monitored before, and then these services designed on top of the monitoring element to offer added value to the end users, which may or may not work. And we, for example, one of the projects that we're looking at is monitoring driver behavior. So you're putting a sensor in a car, and you're trying to see whether the driver is actually looking at the road and is paying attention to the steering wheel when the car is driving by itself. It's a semi-autonomous car. But the question there is, should you be allowed to monitor this driver? Are you actually collecting the right? Can you verify that this driver is actually the responsible owner of this vehicle? And then if something happens, who do you blame for the event? Do you collect data about the driver's identity and then use that in a court case or not? So there are lots of issues that are going to arise when you have multi-user environments. A car may be owned by someone, but maybe used by multiple drivers. So there will be challenges there in terms of verifying who can you attribute this data to. Now, if you move to situations where you're collecting really, personal physiological data on individuals, I think then it really depends on. It will really be the number of questions will come up when you try to use that data to build machine learning systems, for example. So if you're going to try and build a system that learns to advise you on your diet, to advise you on your on your exercise routine, etc. Typically, these systems will have been trained before they are deployed on your watch, on your phones, etc. They will be trained to say, okay, given that on our training data set, we've not noticed, and we've controlled that training data set, we have noticed that if your heart rate is this, then it's likely that you're suffering a heart attack, or you're being a bit too a couch potato, or something like that. So you're trying to ascribe a physical event to some signal. And then I think the big challenge will be, can you actually do this reliably? Can you really do this, provide advice in an ethical way? So, for example, if the data set came from a set of users that you controlled, but the users don't represent the population that's actually using the tool. So if we've trained this on 40-year-old white males in Europe, and then we're trying to deploy this to advise 80-year-old ladies in a care home, will that actually work? And probably not, because physiological signals might be very different. The signs of a heart attack are very different in women. For example, in women, we find some medical literature will tell you that they suffer different symptoms. They have chest pain, nausea, vomiting. And I've had relatives who've been told, go and take a stomach pill and rest while they were having a heart attack. So these physiological signals that are used in training machine learning systems need to come from representative populations. But then, can you guarantee that you will have a representative population for the kind of system that you want to deploy, and then the situations where you will deploy it? So we need to be very clear about the bounds within which we're designing this system. So taking a very user-centered approach, understanding who the eventual users will be, and constructing those the signals as well as the training system to match up with that. And then we also have the problem of interpreting the results. So how much confidence should we give to a system like an AI-based system that can change its behavior, that can learn on the fly as it is deployed? Do the users, or will the users that are using this really understand what's going on? And that's where within the program we have a large a big agenda around responsible research and innovation, which I'm sure Vern will talk about maybe later, right? So we really have expect our research community to reflect on the implications of what they're building, who the users will be, how they will be impacted by the research or the tools that we're designing, and the unintended consequences of these potential tools. So if we design systems that are a bit opaque, may not be fully understandable, and may be deployed with users that don't understand how they work, or may be confused about how they work, then you could end up in situations where you need to they may be harmed, and therefore you need to place regulation around that, or define standards for or specific contexts where they can be deployed safely, and that has implications for insurance as well. You're on mute, Ryan. Ryan, you're on mute.
Very much for the recommendation. It's very interesting that these systems sometimes claim even to know mood and to know your social position and who you would team up with. For example, it's not only about the biological signal. Sometimes they make recommendation beyond really their limit. Thank you. We'll talk about that in the question and answer. We move now to the next speaker at this panel, Dr. Dina Al-Sani, who is assistant professor and the director of interdisciplinary program at the College of Social Science and Engineering at Hamad bin Khalifa University here in Qatar. And she is also the co-chair of the Technology and Behavior Research Group that we are building here in Doha. She has a PhD in human-computer interaction and inclusive design from Queen Mary University of London. She leads she is a leading academic in the field of assistive technology in Qatar, and provide national consultancy and lead projects in cooperation with major stakeholders here, including Qatar Airways and MEDA Assistive Technology Center. Dina, she gives a lot of speech on the topic, and some of them are in the United Nations Council Working Group on Internet Policy issues, and the United Nations Human Rights Social Forum about inclusiveness in software design. And without further delay, I will move straight away to the question, Dina, about really the metaphor and the similarity between designing for disability and designing for people who might not be fully aware of the situation they are in. So we are recommending things for them. We are influencing their behavior, attitude, but they might actually be considered vulnerable. They might be really considered at that particular moment more keen to do something, and they become vulnerable to the software. So something like you are in an airport and you find like Wi-Fi, free Wi-Fi, whatever, you click on it immediately without you sacrifice the risk really of security. It reminds me a bit of the disability, of situational disability. So I want to take your opinion about this similarity and also about your experience with designing for disability and people with some mental health issues.
Thank you very much for the invite. Actually, a huge pleasure to be with basically an established, well-known researcher. I would like to share my slides, if you don't mind. I think there is a feature here to share.
Share screen, yeah.
Yes. I'm sorry, just a second. So I'll share my entire screen because. So please let me know if you can see the slides now. Can you see the slides? Okay, thank you. So as you said, designing for actually for people with disability or people with situational disability is somehow very closely related to ethics and how we look at ethics and research. So in a nutshell, we all know basically ethics falls in preparing, in the stages of preparing the study or your research, then in conducting your research, and finally, and as you said, in basically in interpretation of the results. So basically, here I just want to highlight how ethics plays a big role when we conduct the research, how we design the artifact, and how we collect the data. So looking at disability in the past 40 years, we can know that there are two main models. And actually, in fact, the whole world is shifting toward the second model, which is the social model. However, for me as a researcher, I'll be honest, I've seen the medical model in many research projects. And what do we mean by the medical model is basically, as the definition here, is basically looking at the disability as in the problem. While this is, of course, not acceptable by the disability community, as well as in the policies and the regulation worldwide, from top down, from the United Nations until the policies and regulations in institutions and in countries. So we all look now at disability as the social model and as basically that the design that we offer as a designer are the disabling factor, rather the other way around. So I come from this view. I just wanted to say that I come from this view, and looking at research and at what we do now, basically in research, at least basically in the domain of human-computer interaction, co-design for disability, I could basically summarize the issues or the challenges in these two slides. Firstly, is the model, as I said. The medical model, it does still exist. The mindset, still it does exist. And actually movements in the communities of disability, looking at it, and even in terms of looking at it from mental health and issues related to mental health, people still look at it from this kind of model, that there is a problem, we need to solve it. No, it is not this way. It is how the technologies around us are displayed and designed to help us maintain our lives. Secondly, another challenge that I have observed while working in the field of disability, I've been working in the field of assistive technology and accessibility since more than 13 years. And looking at my work throughout these years and looking at other research and active communities in this field, there is a lack actually in models and theories and framework when it comes to co-designing for an inclusive setting, or a setting with people with different abilities, people with different vulnerabilities, including age and gender and ethnicity. And so when we apply these models, usually we get these models and framework from the mainstream research areas such as HCI and design. And usually these models will not cater. So let's take, for example, Think Aloud protocol with the blind. When the blind use technologies, usually they either use braille display or screen readers. So you're asking them to think aloud while performing a task. This, in fact, it creates some sort of stress on them, and it increases the cognitive level. And hence, even their ability to complete a task is actually at risk, and it's actually not representing a real world action that we would like to evaluate. So basically methods as in Think Aloud or other methods, when they were designed initially, they were not looking at the different groups of population. And there is actually a lot of literature that discusses the application of methods and the issues of application of such methods with different groups of users. So from here, I'd like to highlight that this is one challenge that I think it is important to address. Another challenge is the caregiver involvement. So as we may all know, and if we work with people with disability, usually the caregiver is the proxy to the technology that reaches the people with disabilities, not all disabilities, of course, but a major set of disabilities, as well as the elderly, all the children, so all the vulnerable populations we're talking about. And the caregiver plays as a proxy, as I said. Therefore, we need, in the design process, we need to define their role and actually study their influence on the technology itself and the design process, the requirement gathering process, and even the evaluation process of the technology. So, and in some cases, I've seen personally, caregivers might be overprotective. And that's the right, of course. But how can you, as a researcher, basically deal with such a situation and basically draw the boundaries and actually involve the caregiver in the design process? Last but of course not least is the artifact itself, the technology we are designing. In many settings, and even if it's not with disability, if we are testing something, let's say with students, or sometimes the artifact itself, because it's in the process of evaluation and it is yet to be evaluated fully, it could create some sort of behavior or some sort of emotions, even if these emotions come after the experiment or after the study. These emotions could, if they are negative emotions or negative effects, they might harm the user. So that's again something that even if we looked at it during designing the process, and we had the assumption that our artifact that we've designed is like will never affect or basically cause stress or frustration to the user, it's just an assumption that we need to evaluate, but we need to know that such an artifact will not hurt the participant. And usually when we write IRBs or ethical approvals form, we have this assumption that this tool is just perfect and it will, but we really don't know, and we need to every time re-evaluate the technologies we are using with the user in order for us to not create any sort of stress on the user or any sort of negative or maybe even positive side effects. So we really need to study the effect of the tools we have evaluated. So to just conclude, there is clearly a gap when it comes to ethics and disability and design. And I was happy when Ryan told me that this is a session that and it's taking part in this important conference, because there is actually a gap that we all in the back of our head and in many literature we've seen and discussed. I think there might be a set of basically steps that we could take. Firstly, creating a new body of knowledge that look at this growing community of practitioners and where we could share our concerns. And secondly, and this is very important point, which is the ongoing dialogue between us and the user group. Sometime, and in many cases, I've seen in the literature, we evaluate the final product, while the actual code design will not happen with the entire group of users. You might do, for example, or design a portal for autistic children, while you might only co-design it with teachers, but not with the children themselves. So establishing this ongoing dialogue with all the group of users to understand their consent and need. And finally, of course, developing theoretical models that applies to this area, which we see lack for in the research community.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Dina, for this talk. I mean, the more this workshop is progressing, the more I believe in the role of empathy and soft skills to be, because not really everyone is good at imagining how their software is going to affect other people. So thank you for this talk. And now we will move to Bernd, who also gave a keynote this morning. So I will keep the introduction short, Bernd, as most of the audience know you. So Bernd Stahl is a professor of critical research in technology and the director of the Center of Computing and Social Responsibility at De Montfort University at Leicester in the UK. His interests cover philosophical issues arising from the intersection of business, technology, and information, which includes the ethics of ICT and the critical approaches to information system. So Bernd, my question is a genuine question, actually, is that when we try to help people who need really help, they may have that paradox. So I need you to help me, but not too much, not to control me, you see. And then if we are developing a technology for behavioral change, say, for example, people with addiction or people with some problematic behavior, how far we can go of recommending actions for them and trying to be not only persuasive sometimes, but even coercive sometimes. Because in interviews we have done, some of the people with problematic behavior were telling us, I want you to force me, please, because I cannot. You see, and when you do that, it's not ethical, because you are taking the freedom of choice from them. So I would like to know your views about this conflicting requirement. But we are both muted. Now I am not muted.
Sorry about that. Yes, so as you will probably guess, I don't have a simple answer to that. It's a very complex question. Your last point, that somebody asks you to force them. what does that mean? Do you actually force them when you force them, or do you do what they ask you, right? So it's not obvious to me how you would evaluate that. I think one of the examples that we exchanged ideas about before this panel was the example of gambling, right? And presumably the idea is that you have problem gamblers, and you want to install some sort of system which will recognize when they reach a threshold or when they move beyond what they should be doing, which now raises tons of cans of worms. So now, why do we think gambling is problematic? Why would we not think so? At what threshold does it become problematic? Is it just a financial thing? Do you actually get addicted to it? How do you get addicted? So tons of questions here. And all of them have sort of an ethical component to them, but all of them are also way beyond that. So they have a psychological component to them. They have a political component to them. I think one important aspect of that, even looking just at the ethics, is the empirical side. So what does the system actually do? How reliable is it? Does it actually achieve what it's supposed to do? Because that also isn't obvious to me. So if you were to develop a system which at a certain trigger point would now close down the gambling opportunities to the gambler, how do we know that that's the right trigger point, that it's actually been achieved, that it does what does? So it's a reliability issue, which I think Gopal also referred to earlier, right? So how do we know that the system does what it's supposed to do? And then we still have to worry about whether what it's supposed to do is the right thing that it should be doing. I think the key here is to recognize that there is no clear ethical answer to this, not just because I don't know, but because what we have here is a classical trade-off situation. So you maximize one, then you minimize the other, and you try to find a balance point where the rights of the individual, the right to autonomy, is balanced with the benefit to the individual, or possibly also balanced with his broader or her broader social context. And that, I think, leads to the point where we need to recognize that ethics really isn't the solution. Ethics doesn't tell you what the right answer is. That's just beyond ethics. Ethics can tell you what questions you need to ask, what issues are worthy of consideration, but it doesn't tell you how to solve this. And that's, but that of course doesn't answer your question. And you are the software engineer, and you need to build the system. So what do you do now? So you don't want to hear a philosopher tell you, I don't know. Ethics is many things to many people. And I think the way, or one way forward, is the one that also Gopal referred to a few minutes ago, is responsible innovation. So that's the way it's framed in the UK at the moment, and the European Union used to use that term quite extensively, where the idea is that instead of thinking that we can clearly determine what the ethical, the right ethical thing to do is, we think about what processes need to be in place in order to ensure maximum of exposure of the problem, promote reflection, and allow the relevant stakeholders to come together to discuss these things. So the EPSRC, so the Engineering and Physical Science Research Council flavor of responsible innovation, looks at anticipation, reflection, and engagement, which means there need to be ways of thinking about what possible consequences would be. So in this case, what will be the outcome of having such a system for the gambler, for the social environment, and so on. It's about reflection. So how do the people within the project think about what they're doing, how the people who are affected by it see it, and then it's very much also and crucially around engagement. So ensuring that the right people are in the room when decisions are made, so that you have your users of the system who actually understand the problem, who know why it's a problem, as well as the technical experts, as well as possibly regulatory experts and so on. And then on the basis of these activities, try to develop an action plan that will allow not necessarily the right solution, but at least a solution which is informed by an understanding of the problem space. And I think that's about as good as we get. Now, we will not solve the problem. We will never get in a point or to a point where ethical issues are resolved. But hopefully we can come to a point where we actually understand them well enough to have a well-reasoned conversation about them, and now do whatever the best is under the circumstances. And I think so. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Bernd, for the answer. It's actually, yeah, it's a process. Sometimes actually while we are waiting for the questions to come from the audience, I have this questions to all of you. I mean, what would be an ideal structure of an ethics team? So shall we get a philosopher to work with psychologists, to work with technician, to work with software engineer? It's what we tend to find in this interdisciplinary topic. Everyone is strong in their areas, but actually on the overlap between these areas, there is a communication issue. And we find that in most of the software that we do, regardless from ethics. So we speak a different language from the psychologist. So do you find that when we talk about ethics?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. It's not just between the humanities and the sciences, but also even within the sciences. I mean, I do a lot of work with neuroscientists, and even within the neuroscience communities, the molecular neuroscientists and the cognitive neuroscientists don't understand each other. And I think that's sort of the nature of the beast. My experience is that on the one hand, you need goodwill. So you need people who want to engage with it. So you have some who don't, and then that's it. There's not a lot of progress to be made. And the other thing is that I think it helps to work on specific questions rather than trying to define what do we mean by ethics. No, we never get there. Rather say, well, we now have this particular system we want to build. So what concerns do we need to raise? How may they be addressed? And I think that more specific approach, in my experience, tends to work better. But again, there's no guarantee.
Any comments from Gopal or Dina about that?
Dina, you want to go first?
Thank you. Actually, I go back to the point of the medical versus the social models, and that's actually something I've seen very common in engineering. So basically, if I come to an engineer and I tell him or her I want to design something to do such thing for a specific, basically a disability group, they would look at it as I'm designing a medication to solve an issue. It is not. It is I'm designing an enabling tool. So the mindset is very hard to change, and especially if I'm working with the domain of engineering, the medical mindset is, to be honest, still there. While in the domain of social sciences, the social model, of course, is the dominating model. So that's something that I've seen, I've suffered from, and it's very hard. As Bernard said, it's very hard to engage people and letting them all on the same page.
Thank you. Gopal, if you'd like to comment.
Sure. I mean, we've done a lot of work involving researchers from different disciplines, and we face exactly the challenge that you say. You know, people speak different languages, have different interests, and it's very hard to align everyone on what they mean by the ethical questions that need to be addressed. I think the one thing that I've come to realize over the last all of my career really is that we've never been trained to think about responsible innovation. Most people don't know most researchers don't understand what responsible innovation is. I mean, even research leaders in our field and many other fields don't understand the world, don't understand what the process is to go through responsible innovation. So we're trying to address that. We have already done some training for our researchers and from different disciplines to get them to reflect on the ethical questions and other questions that arise that could go beyond what they're typically used to answering. So if you ask a machine learning researcher whether what's the implication of building a face recognition system, and they might say I'm building the algorithm. I'm not familiar with the laws and the concerns of society around the use of face recognition systems. So to get them to reflect on that requires them to be trained and being asked to go beyond what they're typically used to, beyond their traditional fields. And we'll see more of that in the future, because these are really impacting on our lives. I think we are in a position now where, for example, we're questioning face recognition systems, we're questioning the use of data on social media, etc., etc. Lots of these ethical issues around using personal data from our browsing behaviors, and it's all because these questions could have been asked 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and now we are facing the problem of is Facebook a utility, or is it meant to be regulated? And we can already see, if we start that reflection now, we will see questions around the use of machine learning systems in our cars, in our homes, etc., as raising really key critical ethical questions, as we are doing now in this workshop. So really pushing that to the research community and telling them, look, this is not your key technical area, but it is an important thing that you'll need to address in 10 years' time or in 5 years' time. And just 2 days ago, we've heard about the first sort of autonomous UAV that shot down someone in Libya and without human intervention. And for years we've been hearing about lethal autonomous weapons. But the AI community has a view on this, but it is a debate that needs to be had very early on with the researchers, with the policymakers, and bringing those teams together. But it needs to be pushed to the research communities at the very top level.
Thanks, Gopal. There is a question here from Bashak about the technique that we could use to resolve conflicts in requirements. Something like autonomy, the mastery, the autonomy, the independence on one hand, and the comfort on the other, or the right decision on the other hand. The question could be generalized a bit more to say, do we need to resolve conflicts or to live with conflicts when it comes to ethics? And is it likely that people will converge to a certain decisions, or we have to accommodate that diversity even in ethics, in the views to ethics? If Bernd can start with the answer.
Yeah. So as I said, I don't think ethics is there to get rid of conflict. That's not likely to happen anytime soon. I think what ethics can do is can highlight what exactly is the cause of the conflict. What are the differences? What are the underlying values? I wouldn't want to terribly overplay that. I think we do have a lot of consensus on many ethical aspects. And to give the primary example of where humanity has come together and agreed on things, it's what we call human rights. Right? I would argue that those are expressions of consensual ethical positions. But of course, that doesn't mean that you can use them to simply deduce how you develop a particular system. So I think it's both. On the one hand, we need to understand that there will be different positions on various different aspects, and that's not going to change anytime. Well, it's never going to change. Different people have different views. So in some cases, we will need to have to live with that. But we also, I think, have one of the tasks of reflecting on what exactly the differences are. And in many cases, I think they can be either resolved or they can be escalated to a point where there is agreement already. But no, there's no algorithm for that. There's a lot of it's more an art than a science, I would say.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Bernd. Gopal or Dina, if you like to comment.
If I may jump in, we engage a lot in these debates, for example, around these ethical debates around the use of autonomous lethal weapons and stuff, and it's going to be the same when you come to monitoring and then profiling users. You're going to have different positions on the topic, and then you'll be asked to, and sometimes you're asked to take a stance on it, and it can be a very personal thing rather than just something that you can say this community takes this view. I mean, the AI community tried to take the view that we should never build a lethal autonomous weapon, an autonomous lethal weapon. But in taking that stance, you also what does it help you do better? Because the technology that you build doesn't really, or is not under your control. Someone else might use it against you, and the defense community has to answer these questions sometimes. And it will be the same in healthcare when you're trying to use data to monitor patients, and then this data is also used by companies to monitor you and sell you stuff. So there are always misuses of data that we can't foresee, or misuse of AI systems that we can't foresee. But we just need to be aware of it, and saying I don't want this stuff and I'm not going to build it doesn't mean that someone else is not going to build it. So you need to be ready for the alternative to come back at you at some point. So how do you build defenses against those? So raise awareness first, and then build defenses against those. So I think acknowledging the challenges that will arise with the technology that you're building upfront, and then engaging with policymakers and regulators to make sure that the misuses are mitigated.
Thank you, Gopan. Dina, if you'd like to comment, or I can ask another question.
Yeah, you can go ahead and ask another.
But actually, my other question would be about the explainability thing. So we speak about informed consent and explainability, but we do really know that not everyone is going to be engaged with explainability. But we do also know that not everything is explainable. Even if you ask people in AI to explain the rationale, especially in certain algorithms, and especially certain things are really emerging properties. So you can't even prepare explanation for them in advance. So does that mean that the ethical process is something that can stop, or it has to be continuous one? Dina would like to answer your question, especially that you work with people with autism, where things like can go really wrong in practice. It doesn't stop at the design stage. So what's your view about that?
I think, as you said, explainable AI, as we refer to it, and sometimes the designer themselves are unable to explain the outcome. And as you said, it could affect basically the vulnerable group we are working with. Even if we are working with children in main schools, and basically we've been exploring such a topic with education and children. Again, it is we refer back to the responsible innovation and being able to basically know the effects of our or the artifact we designs, and basically I don't believe that ethics should stop when the project starts. We should continue revising and reviewing because we all know now that technology could create some sort of behavior or effect that is not intended, and therefore the process of or the responsible way of looking at the research artifact is extremely important and should not stop once we just get the approval and start our studies.
This question to Bernd in the keynote, but your answer, Gopal, to that. We got 3 minutes, so we have quick notes from each of you, but we'd like to hear your opinion about that, about the explainability. Is explainability a solution?
Very quickly, explainability may be part of the solution, but I think it's more about designing a continuous evaluation process, a responsive process that works a bit like the airline industry. When things go wrong, you capture it, you report it, and you devise a solution to it very quickly. I think we have the ability to capture data, events, and failures very quickly. And when explanations are not working, for example, how do we need to redesign it for this evolving AI-based system potentially, or the changing expectations of our users? So we need to, or understandings of the users. So we need to have established processes for them.
Okay, well, thank you for that. So we got 2 minutes, like free speech from each of you, recommendation to the software engineering community. And I have to say that we are used always to listen to the customers, to the clients, to know what they want, and we build what they want. But sometimes the customers are building a nuclear weapon, for example, as you said. So I would like to hear from you any advice for the community in terms of research to do and the recommendation is a practice of software engineering, starting by Bernd.
Okay, I'll pick up on something that Dina said. I mean, this distinction between medical and social. Now, while she talked about this in terms of disability, I would talk about this in terms of ethics. We're very used to seeing ethics in terms of medical ethics, the principles, which are then checked through ex-ante review. And I think my main message would be that's important. I don't want to throw it out the window, but I think we need to recognize that ethics is a lot broader than that. And whether we use terms like responsible innovation or whatever else we want to call it, I think the important thing is that we need to realize that ethics starts before the design phase and it goes beyond the market introduction. And it's something that we need to develop sensibility to if we want this to be successful.
Dina, if you can hear your opinion about the last message to the community.
Actually, I echo Bernd. Actually, ethics is an ongoing process. It should not stop once before the study or in the middle or toward the end. It should be a responsible innovation that continues even after the product is all rolled down and it's in the market. we need to continue monitor the ethical perspectives of the users and the artifact itself. That's my message.
Thank you. We got 30 seconds, so let me close here so that we go to the next one in a more like orderly fashion here. But thank you very much for your talk. I genuinely enjoyed it. It was truly enjoyable talk. So we'll go now to the other room for the closing session, and thank you for all the panelists for this talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.